Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute for today's discussion. Today's webinar is part of a four-part ETI series running from January through March 2026 titled Digital Transformation for Acquisition, the Answer to Speed. The goal is to engage with the defense community on an important challenge, how we can deliver capability at the speed the mission demands. We hope this series can serve as a source on what digital acquisition really means, why it matters, and how it can fundamentally improve the way we design, test, procure, produce, and sustain weapon systems. Across these four sessions, we are convening leaders from government, industry, and the technical community to examine different dimensions of digital acquisition, from engineering and data use to program management and decision-making. Importantly, this is not just a discussion series. These conversations will be captured and published in a report this May at the Navy Postgraduate School Acquisition Research Symposium. The focus on digital transformation is timely. Congress has shown sustained interest for years in accelerating defense acquisition, and this past year was no exception. At the same time, the Pentagon has placed renewed emphasis on speed, recognizing that traditional acquisition timelines no longer align with the pace of technological change or the demands of the strategic environment. To implement these changes to statute, regulation, and policies, the Pentagon needs a new framework for how acquisition is designed and operated. Digital acquisition provides that framework. We intend for this series to reflect NDIA and ETI's ongoing commitment to providing thought leadership on critical national security issues. Through efforts like the Vital Signs Report, the Emerging Technologies Conference, and focused initiatives like this one, NDIA is working to convene stakeholders, identify emerging challenges and opportunities, and provide useful insights for decision makers. Most importantly, this work aims to support the defense industrial base and NDIA's members. Digital acquisition has the potential to reduce risk, improve transparency, lower barriers to entry, and create clearer pathways from innovation to fielded capability. For our members, that means better outcome for programs and ultimately for the warfighter. With that, thank you again for joining us. I look forward to today's discussion and to the insights that will shape the rest of this series. I'll now hand it over to Stephanie Halcrow, ETI's visiting scholar and our moderator for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Norquist. What a wonderful introduction and scene setting. I am Stephanie Halcrow. As Mr. Norquist said, I am moderating today's panel, the first webinar of a 4-webinar series. And I'm joined by 3 amazing leaders in the digital acquisition space. We have an individual from government, 2 from industry, and both are working as partners in that effort. Today's webinar and the series is really a passion project of mine. I spent a lot of time on the Hill leading acquisition reform efforts and working with the department to implement them. And really, over that time, not a lot changed. And what I realized is that the department needed a different framework for approaching acquisition. And I think digital acquisition is the answer to that. So I'm really looking forward to this, the conversations that are going to be happening over the next couple months. And I'd like to say that I truly believe this is just the start of the conversation and not the final word. I'd like to invite the participants to drop questions into the chat whenever you have them. I'll be taking questions throughout the conversation as opposed to waiting till the end. So if you've got a question and you want to respond to something that you hear one of our panel members say, please drop that into the chat. With that, let's get started. I'd like to start with a question to Lieutenant General retired Mike Gunny Schmidt. Mike is recently retired from the Air Force, and he founded his own global consulting firm, also is an advisor to Dayton Development Coalition and Jobs Ohio. When he was in the Air Force, he was most recently the F-35 CEO, but had a PEO, excuse me, but had a number of senior leader roles that he saw digital acquisition starting to take hold. And so my first question to you, Mike, is that when we look at digital acquisition, and you were a PEO in many organizations, what were some of the challenges that you saw as the digital tools evolved and were becoming ripe for implementation into these programs?
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And like you, I'm very passionate about this subject. I have spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill and in numerous organizations trying to move the ball forward. It's kind of a loaded question. There's a lot that's been going on in this area, and in my opinion, not fast enough over the last few years, especially. If you think about it, our F-15s and F-16s are 50 years old. Even our F-22s 30 years old. Even the F-35 is 20. F-22 and the F-35 still have huge amounts of development work going on to continue to advance those platforms. Yet the whole conversation, in a lot of cases, goes to those programs that are new, that are born digital, if you will, that are the next generation of platforms, where we need to really focus on the legacy platforms as well. Sustainment is where 70% of the cost of any weapon system goes. Digital twins are a complete game changer, especially in sustainment. 3D printing, the ability to do that, the ability to continue to expand our capacity in our industrial base, and competition, not just for the sake of competition, but for truly expanding our ability to deliver and sustain weapon systems, relies on our ability to create things like digital twins. Investment has always been a challenge. Who should make the investments? Is it industry? Is it the government? Is it both? And we could debate that forever. And truly, we need to collaborate better in figuring those things out. As a PEO, I like to own my own destiny. And you kind of have a natural movement towards building your own little eco empire of digital. And the reality is we should be focused on common tools. And when I was a PEO C3IN, we had great people working on it. Cloud One, Platform One, unified platform for Cyber Command. And I still felt like there was a lot of resistance out there, both in industry and in the government, to go to common systems. And then you always end up at this intellectual property discussion, which is solvable, but we tend to put that up as a roadblock. Well, it's too hard. We have to do it this way. I have to have my own tools. We have to buy into the same systems over and over again with slight differences in every weapon system. And we will never get to where we need to be if we keep doing that. So a culture of patience, of cooperation, and the need for end-to-end environments that connect to each other at all security levels is I don't know that there's an end point, but to me, that's a true starting point, is when everyone can talk to each other digitally across our defense industrial base.
Thanks, Mike. Man, you dropped a lot there. Talking about being born digital versus being reborn digital. Where does the investment come from? Is it one program invests in their own digital transformation for acquisition, or is it a coordinated effort? I think you mentioned MOSA and IP. Man, I really want to touch on those important topics as this conversation develops. So thank you for kicking us off with that. So Kevin, let me turn to you. As President and CEO of Modern Technology Solution Incorporated, MTSI, I know that you're a 100% employee-owned company that focuses on engineering and technology solutions and providing rapid capability development. I think your organization, your company was partners in standing up the Rapid Capability Office. Some of your other notable activities have been partnering with the Next Generation Air Dominance NGAD program office to implement digital transformation. And that's something that you really bring to your government customers, is providing the solutions to help them on their digital transformation for acquisition journey. Can you share a little bit about how MTSI approaches those activities with your customers, and what opportunities exist that we aren't taking advantage of in that area?
Yeah, sure, Stephanie. Thanks for the intro. Just a little background on me. Met Will Roper. We worked as engineers on the Missile Defense Agency, senior engineers for General Obering and Pat O'Reilly. Will moved over to start OSD SCO for DxA Carter, and then he took MTSI with him. So we've been Will for a long time and talking about this journey of digital acquisition transformation. Then NGAD got started formally. It was a DARPA activity and got started, Next Generation Air Dominance, and wanted to get away from the things we experienced with fifth generation fighters, vendor lock, open system architectures, really open up the competition for manned and unmanned platforms. You've heard of F-47 and CCA, but it was a totally different approach in 2018 with great leadership. So Will had a very specific vision. People like General White came in. They really had a specific vision. So there was a lot of unity command, which is really important for digital transformation, is having that top-down leadership mandate. We're going to do it this way. And the other thing we learned, it was different than our traditional work. So when we started NGAD, we had our senior engineers and aviation experts and survivability experts, all the things you'd have in a normal SPO. But what Will demanded, and then General White, was we need to have the digital engineers, the software expertise, the digital ecosystem, the security people. So the skill mix was very, very different. And so that's been a key underpinning of all of our work. It's a different way of doing the work. It's working in the ecosystems. It's having knowledge parity with the OEMs. Some other lessons learned very early on was this negotiation of data. What is the data across the ecosystem? Data rights, government purpose rights. So negotiations very early on 5-year or 10-year government purpose rights. Use of associate contract agreements so people in the ecosystem could collaborate and they could share information in a different way. And then IP protection, but we want to promote a lot of non-proprietary, but IP protection, for instance, source code on software, right? So how do you containerize your software to do that? So a very disciplined approach of getting after some hard problems that so they are hard but doable with the right approaches. And then getting everyone working in the ecosystem. So one of our first jobs was to get a SAP ecosystem stood up for 20 OEMs to connect with within 6 months. So all the authorities were there, all the cybersecurity talent was there, so we could do that very quickly to get people connected. Of course, this was a very small ecosystem to the one General Smith talked about. So it was a doable do. It gets harder as you get more stakeholders involved. And so it's been a very disciplined approach since then, and getting F-47, now CCA going. Now fast forward, we've done that type of lessons learned to many customers to where we are today with things like next generation missile defense. Another great leader, Lieutenant General Collins, has the same vision for digital acquisition, digital transformation. He's seen successes along the way. A much bigger challenge, though, to work across that enterprise. Lots of legacy systems, lots of documented waterfall approaches that have to change. He stood up a transformation task force, but to get that leadership commitment to the organization, to change the workforce skill mix, to get people familiar with the tools and capabilities across the life cycle is a really, really big change initiative. We're in the middle of doing that. We've got General Gutlein and Golden Dome pushing speed. We've got the Department of War, SPEED Act, the new MEIA. I think we have a lot of forcing functions now. I think I'm going to opportunities for us to do the work differently, but it's got a lot of challenges and barriers that we need to systematically tackle, both from the industry side and the government side.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you. Priority now is different. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about digital acquisition, because as you mentioned, it's really about changing processes. It's not digitizing the existing processes, it's changing the processes and taking advantage of the digital tools that are out there. You mentioned Will Roper. This is a 4-part webinar series, and we haven't announced it yet, but I'll just give people on this call a sneak peek. But Will Roper will be participating in a fireside chat for our last webinar of the series. So we are just thrilled to have him. You also mentioned NGAD and how you started NGAD and the things that were important. In our second webinar, which is in 2 weeks, we were able to secure the former program manager of the NGAD effort, and he will talk about those nuts and bolts and how to get started. In fact, that's the title of the webinar. Enough about that. I want to turn to Tony Frazier. Thank you for joining us from Leo Labs. Leo Labs is a leader in persistent orbital intelligence for national security. Say that 3 times fast. But you're known for your speed in delivering solutions driven by the digital ecosystem. And when I think of digital ecosystems or digital acquisition, I think of the entire life cycle of the weapon system. We've had some, Mike and Kevin both touched on things other than digital engineering. And so often people just say digital acquisition is digital engineering. It's not the same. There's a whole entire life cycle. Can you speak to how Leo Labs is leveraging digital tools, digital acquisition for the whole entire life cycle?
Yeah, sure, Stephanie. Thank you. So as you mentioned, Leo Labs is a leading source of persistent orbital intelligence that's focused on the different missions. So we focused on space domain awareness, space traffic management, and missile defense. And I think in terms of how we go to market, we are a venture-backed business, so we've raised private capital to invest in new products, at risk. And our goal is to put that private capital to work in a way that allows us to balance speed, cost, and mission effectiveness. And so a lot of the ways that we've applied different digital engineering tools to then inform how we would carry things through the life cycle is we start with our modular components for our systems. Those then turn into operational prototypes, and then we partnered with the U.S. government, most notably AFRL, as well as the Space Force, on how to rapidly mature our capabilities to make sure that we're on mission for a given requirement. So we were awarded 2 direct-to-SBIR Phase 2 contracts in 2023 and 2024 that allowed us to get some additional funding and support to build initial prototypes. But because we're building real hardware systems, so these are radar systems that are able to monitor objects and activity in space, it's a real capital investment on our part. So we invested millions of dollars to build these systems. We wanted to make sure that they were on mission. And so what we were able to do through that process was we built based on a set of unclassified commercial requirements to get the first prototypes built. And then we were able to be qualified for the next phase in maturation through a couple awards, a STRATFI and TACFI award from SpaceWorks and Space Systems Command, where we were able to get our team members cleared to be shoulder to shoulder with leaders within the Program Executive Office that owns all the ground-based radars that contribute to both space domain awareness and missile warning, to start to do detailed engineering trade studies on how those systems, those initial prototypes, could be evolved to meet a really urgent classified threat. And so that was really helpful for us because when you're investing in non-recurring engineering, you want to make sure you're building something that's going to be on mission. And so that led to our commitment to get a new system built in the Indo-Pacific region by 2027 to be able to support that requirement. So that's where we are so far in the journey. Maybe with the next kind of questions, I can talk a bit more about where we see things going in the future.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And something that I forgot to mention is your past experiences and partnerships with commercial space companies. And I think when you talk about building modular components and leveraging commercial technology, that is something that fits so nicely into digital acquisition and really enhances the application. Thank you. So Mike, we've had, I'll turn to you. We've had a couple people talk about the need to think about acquisition in a different way, using the term digital acquisition as that term of how to think about it. And one of the goals of this webinar series is to define digital acquisition and kind of get that on the books, and so people can refer to that when they use that term. So when I think about digital transformation for acquisition, I've read some information that says you've got to use digital tools, digital technologies, you've got to change your processes, you have to look at the culture, you have to like think about employee experience. You know, it's not just about, can I say this? Not just about the warfighter, like, or everybody's the warfighter. We need to think about the people using these tools, the employee experience. And then, of course, meeting today's requirements, which would be supporting the warfighter. With those, what else should we be considering if we're going to try to define digital acquisition?
Well, that's a great and challenging question, I think, Stephanie. I think those are good definitions of, what digital engineering or digital transformation is. But it is in the details that matter. Kevin already talked about, what Jenna White and Jason Voorhees and Tim Helfrich and team were doing on that program. And they certainly created a mindset, a culture, to try to go after it. Again, it was, they brought industry in and kind of set the ground rules from the beginning. Okay, so I'm not saying that was easy. It's not. I'm really proud of the work they all did there. But I'm kind of back to, so how do we spread that across all of our weapon systems, especially our legacy weapon systems that we are going to be, and we keep focusing on Air Force programs. We should probably focus on other services as well. But certainly it stands out like a sore thumb how long, we're going to fly the B-52, 100 years in total, and all those kind of things. Yet we're struggling sometimes in the details of what you said was, how do we transition to a digital transformed organization for legacy programs? It takes really good people in this space, and there aren't a ton of them, but they have to be in the programs, not just sitting in high back chairs directing traffic. We got to have the good people in the programs understanding what it means. What does cloud really mean? What does cloud security mean? What does connecting all your systems at the SAP level, the secret level, the NIPR level, what does connecting really mean? When you say we're going to go invest in digital tools, which tools are we going to invest in? And then we say we're going to empower our people to go do this. Well, leadership has to stand up, and it's more than just saying you're empowered. These are busy people in the legacy programs or in the new programs. They got to have time and space to train, to understand. And if everybody's got a different tool out there, how are you ever, so there needs to be true collaboration between industry and the government on, government reference architectures, on what tools are we going to use, what needs to be connected, what are the priorities within all of that, and who's going to make those investments? Again, is a really, really important conversation. And I do think there are always ways to yes on the intellectual property thing with ACAs or whatever it means. And even in the clouds, we found ways to tag data to truly hold intellectual property separate from others. To certainly allow only access to people that are cleared and all that kind of stuff. Again, if you can do that in a digital environment that we all agree with, we can all let someone else do the security within the system and ensure that, versus having a zillion attack vectors across our defense industrial base. So, those are a lot of words to just say it is the details that matter, and we need to get some experts into our program offices and reward them for the work they're doing, and allow them to take some risk in terms of moving forward. And the leadership, it has to start there. It needs to be 100% in. That training isn't just for them, it's for you too. So just my thoughts there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's great. You bring up the concept of digital literacy. And I know when I started this journey, I thought I was pretty digitally hip. I had a computer science degree from the 90s, and, I kept it up to date. But man, I would fail if you had given me a digital literacy of what is currently out there and available. You talk about the need for collaboration. So I'm going to come back to that and ask a question on that, if that's okay. You hit on the need to digitally transform legacy systems again. You talked about in the first in your first opening comments. I'd also like to highlight that in the third webinar of this series, we're going to have lightning talks from different companies that will present the art of the possible. And we have one company that focuses on helping legacy systems digitally transform. So with that said, Tony, next question I'd like to ask you and get your perspective. If we figure out how to define digital acquisition, we get all the details right. I mean, why do we need to do this? What problem are we trying to solve? And why is it so important for the government to lead this effort and to industry to partner with the government in digital acquisition?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. It's super important because we want to be able to skate where the puck is going. Is maybe the kind of the short way I would describe it, which is when we being in this industry for a long time and again thinking about a shift to encourage industry to make investments on risk to be able to deliver capabilities to the warfighter faster. It's really important to understand the nature of the threat and how the threat's evolving, in a way that allows industry to make investment decisions. So one of the things which we've been working towards, which I think is definitely relevant to your question, is if you look at kind of the way in acquisition, the life cycle of it, it starts with a requirement, combatant commander requirement, and then that requirement would then inform priorities that a acquisition office would take responsibility to execute on, and then make sure the funding is there to be able to satisfy that requirement over time. And so one of the areas that we've been really focused on is how do we take what was the commercial space integration strategy that the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command rolled out and make that real in terms of how we can augment the architecture. And what was really interesting is General Whiting and U.S. Space Command rolled out what their space domain awareness requirements were. They updated their integrated capabilities document on that this past June, and but to bridge that to what the exact threats are, how many new launches are coming out of China, what's the number of adversarial payloads which are putting U.S. interest in space at risk, how many ISR satellites are going to be targeting our U.S. and allies, at sea and in land. Those are all areas where the nature of the threat, how it's evolving, matters a lot in terms of where and how we might be able to invest, to fill those gaps in coverage at scale. And so one of the things that I'd love to see is a bridging between the modeling and simulation, that would allow industry to be able to, bring digital versions, of their wares forward, to be able to assess the mission effectiveness, of those systems, to being able to address a given threat. In our case, we want to be able to maintain custody, of persistent threats, in space and from space. And so that then would inform, how a commercial solution could address that problem relative to, a traditional legacy, system. So I think that that's really important. We're seeing that kind of manifest within the Space Force ecosystem. I think as we look at initiatives like Golden Dome, where we're building a system of systems, it's going to be even more important to look at how some of the the efforts that Undersecretary Michael has rolled out around the role mission engineering will play, to help with that effort. How do we each bring things forward that can contribute to prosecuting not just a threat today, but also what we forecast the threat to be tomorrow.
Your comments there were gold. I had not thought about what I think I took from your comments. So as I view, let me just as I view digital transformation for acquisition, I really saw it like as a one way, like, we do the one way life cycle. And what I'm hearing you say is that it's circular. Like it's not the today's problem that we're trying to solve only. By implementing digital transformation for acquisition, we are improving our ability to solve tomorrow's problem by being able to identify the threat more quickly, identify the solution more quickly. That's gold. Thank you for sharing that and that perspective. I really appreciate it. Something that everybody has touched on is the need for collaboration and for collaborative platform architectures. And I read a report that the Defense Business Board put out a couple years ago, focused on creating a digital ecosystem, creating a digital ecosystem. And in that report, they highlighted the need for collaborative platform architecture and a roadmap. So Kevin, turning to you, it sounds like you help your government customers with this and have found some success in it. Can you describe how you do that and maybe some of the challenges that you find that you're overcoming and how you overcome those?
Sure. So first, some terminology and stage settings. I think and by the way, it was an excellent report. Got a chance to read it. And this section was digital ecosystem planning and IT. So how do you put all this together? And right, so these collaborative platform architecture, think of it this way. You've got in each stage of the development cycle, architectures, requirements, design, development, test, production, O&S. You have this integrated digital environment. You have this tool suite, these platforms, these tools, these technologies. And so, for example, you need to think about it in an enterprise like Golden Dome or Next Generation Missile Defense. How do you exercise the digital engineering process across the enterprise using tools like Cameo and Rhapsody and Door? So there's all this tooling that goes on. But one of the lessons learned we have, each IDE in each section of that life cycle needs to be purpose-built with specific training. And the tooling integration is never trivial. It's never out of the box, does it work? And you got to have the right people with the right skill sets working that environment with the right training. So you have your digital engineering environments. Then you have your modeling and sim. There's a lot of emphasis, as Tony just talked about, working these ecosystems. So we can give mods and sims like AvSims and benchmarks, these government-owned systems, to the non-traditional players. They can plug their ideas into this environment to rapidly get assessments of their tech ability to solve these hard government problems. Then you have your software factories and pipelines. We really want to generate, with time phase acquisition, which the department is going after, much more rapid. You build your hardware, but then how do we get our spirals of software into the field very quickly and then adapt it based on countermeasures like we're seeing in the Middle East or we're seeing in Ukraine. So this is a really big enabler of going fast with software. Then you've got your design tools, and there's different design tools in industry. There's Siemens NX, there's the Salt 3DX, and these are great tools. But again, a lesson learned is they never do everything. They never interface cleanly. So you've got to work this digital thread across these tools and these interfaces so you can share this authoritative source of truth. And so one of our specialties is digging into all those details and all those phases of the life cycle and getting the tooling to work, getting the tooling to talk. But I guess one of the takeaways is it never is as easy as you think it is. It's really about getting at the guts and the details of how the tools work. And taking a step back, it's really important to have a governance structure over the whole thing. So governance on the data rights, going back to that, but also on the contract strategies and the acquisition strategy and contract strategy that set expectations from the beginning. Really important you have that governance structure. So I think the idea of having an organization, the report recommended like A&S and R&E, would put together these lessons learned, these exemplars, this tooling that's used successfully. I think that would be really useful. I don't think it's really happened yet. What we do as a company is get out there with lessons learned and help people to get on this journey. So one of the things we did lately with the Space-Based Interceptor program, with a systems engineering lead for that on the Space Force side. But just as Tony talked about, how do we work all these lines of effort with all these non-traditional and traditional players so we can move at an unprecedented speed to go do a demonstration in 2028 in several lines of effort. But it takes team ball, it takes sharing models, it takes sharing ecosystems. The Space Force has set up this space den that the contractors can plug right into. It has all the tools in there. They can access the tools, but those are the things we have to do better as a country to get after these different important missions.
Thanks, Kevin. You mentioned again the need for digital literacy, having the right people, having the right skill sets, and understanding the tools as so important if you want to build this roadmap and build this collaborative architecture. So I'm going to call an audible and ask a question to the three of you, because we do have a question from the participants that asks about skill sets of employees, whether it be on the government side or industry side. If somebody wants to improve their ability to work in this area because they're already in a position and they want to, they say, I like what I'm hearing. What skills should we be looking for, and what skills should that person be seeking to improve themselves with? Mike, let me start with you.
Okay, it's another great question. I found, especially when I was PEOC3INN, that the number of people who know all the buzzwords was quite lengthy. Very few people knew the next level beyond the buzzwords, and I think everyone, all of us, could do a lot by just doing some homework on what does cloud mean? What does cloud security mean? What do these tools mean? What do we mean by the challenges Kevin talked about connecting the gaps between the systems that don't talk to each other? I think that's literally one thing that we could all be doing, and there's not enough of that out there. It is the supervisors need to understand that if this digital transformation is going to happen, you have to get your teams together and give them space to learn and play with these tools and understand what it's meant. And then, again, I was a little focused back then on, some of the new common systems we had coming out, Cloud One and Platform, Cloud One on the storage side, Platform One on the development side. If you're in that space but don't understand there are opportunities in there to play around with it, if you will, to put whatever your program is, and there are thousands across the DoD, into the cloud. What does that mean? Follow it along the process with people that do it. So, it's a great question, and I just look for anyone and appreciate anyone that wants to raise their hand and say, I want to understand this better. And then it's my job, or it was my job. I felt like, hey, create an environment where they can get those kind of skills and that kind of training.
I heard you say, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, maybe not, that ETI should develop a digital transformation for acquisition boot camp. I don't know. That's what I heard. So Tony, the question that we got from the participants was really focused and targeted to you, and they wanted to know, like, when you think about your mission critical team members, what are the skills that they have?
I think the key the key point is that there are different players that you need to assemble into a team, to get the outcome you want. And so, in terms of who we work with on the government side, it's the J8 within Space Command, then working with the right technical subject matter experts within the program executive office, and then ultimately that is creating helping us converge on an engineering design that's going to be relevant to the specific mission. I think the specific skill set, though, that I found is a gap that where we need more talent is to translate technical capability into mission impact. And so as an example, with our system, we have a global radar network today. We can design an array that can be based on the size of it and the power that we apply to it. It can be, we can increase the sensitivity, we can detect smaller objects with higher confidence. We can perform different operations in terms of being able to track an object, over, a large area in space. Translating that technical capability, which translates into schedule and cost, into what really matters, is really hard. And so one example that we're working through now is, today, we track about 26,000 objects in space that are the size of a softball or larger, so 10 centimeters in size, or larger in low Earth orbit. So anything 250 kilometers up to 2,500 kilometers in space. We believe that we can reliably detect objects that are 2 centimeters in size, so the size of a marble, through an investment in our what we call our Ranger class of radar. Understanding for human spaceflight safety, what really matters, right? If the ISS is flying at 400 to 500 kilometers, what would be the human safety benefit of that? That's really where there's a gap, I would say, is translating those kind of mission requirements in the technical capability, and I think that is something that that without that you don't get the velocity that you want in terms of acquisition processes.
There's so much talk about people leaving the mission environment. So I'm gonna use the term veterans, but not just military, uniformed military people participate in the mission, but lots of people are leaving government, leaving as veterans. What an opportunity to get smart on technical aspects, digital literacy, and become that translator between what technology can support the missions that are out there. Kevin, you teed up this idea about having the right skill sets, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, especially coming from a leader of a 100% employee-owned company. But I'd also like to move into a conversation about data, because we have another participant question about data and IP. And there always seems to be a point of contention about this topic between government and industry. But it sounds like MTSI and the programs that you've worked on have found some ways forward. And I'd love to hear more about that, and how that might be not only with industry, sharing with government and working in collaborative platforms, but is there a way for industry to share data and IP? So Kevin, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I'll do both. So the training, we have a whole curriculum. We've been at it for about 10 years. So we do have a whole curriculum, digital engineering, SysML, ModSense. You really need to get people so they're true digital practitioners, not just the buzzwords, but get in there and do it. So we do, and we have that available too. We have a 4-hour DT 101 class. That's sort of the basics of digital transformation across the whole phases. But on the data side, a lot of the challenges are not technical. That's why I get back to setting the stage with leadership vision, acquisition strategy, contracting strategy. You can work these government purpose rights. You've got to be clear from a mission perspective what you're trying to accomplish, what is the mission, what level of collaboration. And the other thing, you've got to put together environments and ecosystems that the vendors have confidence in. So one of the things we've learned too is on the security side, on the vendor side, is being very transparent. How is the system going to work? What are the expectations of your particular environment you're working in? How are you going to interface with the government ecosystem, for example, to deliver software projects or concepts of ideas? How specifically is the government going to protect them, containerize them, or whatever the techniques are, particularly to protect software? And then just get agreements on the rules of the game and how this collaborate, and do that up front. Don't wing it during the development program, right? And don't discover these things. They're gonna pop up, and then you have to have those. Again, there's a trust factor that comes with this data challenge. So setting expectations and accountability with the right incentives, the right governments, and the right level of trust, right? So I think all those things together. And again, in these rapid environments where we're asking vendors to share their data, and often in a competitive environment, the government needs to react the right way when things don't go right, right? When you find something that's not going right, there's an issue. We want to work as respectful team players to help the vendor put his best foot forward in a fair competition. But it really is about the right people with the right skill set, the right governance, and incentives too. So one of the things we found work really well in some of the programs we work are gated competition. So competition is a wonderful incentive. So when incentive is performance-based, we're going to put your best foot forward in a rapid sprint. Let's say it's a 3-month software build. Go at it. You do your work, and then you have these gates where, okay, you go on to the next phase, the next funding increment. Even vendors that didn't make that gate, you're still in the game. You can invest your IRAD. We've got other things coming, but this continuous innovation ecosystem with both non-traditional and traditional vendors at multi-levels of classification, where you can take unclass and roll it up to top secret SAP and do those types of things, really can get the ecosystem going fast. And, Tony, again, you talked about mission engineering. That is the vision of some of the new leadership at R&E, Honorable Michael and Mr. Kagi and Mr. Brevoot. They are really going after this MEIA mission and the ecosystem really hard. So I think you're going to see some changes at senior levels of the government in doing these types of things in a much more rapid way. And one last thing is not getting overly rotated on prescriptive requirements. I think we're trying to change that very quickly. What are the attributes of the mission? And be willing to take the 80% solution and go after it to get this to our warfighters.
Those are great comments. I love the idea about having digital practitioners. I use the word digital literacy, but I like digital practitioners.
It's more than
better.
that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because it's more than just literacy. It's actually being able to use it. So I appreciate you sharing that. I also love the idea of gated competitions. I've heard of that before, but I really would love to get responses from Mike and Tony on what you presented with regards to data and, having those conversations early. Does that work in other programs? What are some of the other challenges that have been seen? Mike, could you respond to that?
Well, sure. I've been on the other end of most of the programs that I've run where we didn't have the opportunity to have that conversation early on. And so now we're in the opposite situation of having the conversation later that nobody wants to have, which is a very challenging. We shouldn't say nobody. I don't want to be too negative about it. But, together, we have to march down this road absolutely together. We have to sit in a room with open minds and say, I understand we've been operating under this, system of intellectual property, lack of investment in digital transformation. What are the incentives to do so? If you think about, I just saw the other day that the B-52 had their first 3D printed part that was safety critical to be used on an airplane. Now, that's awesome. The fact that we're talking about it right now and not 10 years ago is not awesome. But it's everybody in the room has to get together and have these conversations. We talk about model in simulation in certainly weapons certification on airplanes all the time, and how we should be doing less flight tests and more reliance on the models. The whole community has to agree to that, not just the companies, not just the program manager. There's a whole test community out there that still is like, well, prove it to me. And I'm not trying to be negative on this 3D printing thing of a B-52 part. We've been printing parts for a long time. We should, for our national security, we should be able to digitally reproduce every single part on every single airplane, how old it is. And I don't just, again, mean airplanes. Then the Navy, and I wish I knew more about exactly what they're doing. They are on a full-fledged effort to turn shipbuilding into a huge digital transformation, because it does take forever, and it takes skilled manpower across this country that we don't have, honestly, right now to do the shipbuilding that we have going forward. And there's no we'll do it without this digital transformation. That involves all those ship companies to get together with a mindset that we're going to do this thing differently with the Navy. So it is truly about, I think, collaboration. And again, I'd love to be at the beginning of a brand new program and have the conversations all up front. But we need to have this discussion across the board with the entire community, all the functionals out there, that still are sitting on the sidelines. I think we talk a big game about modeling and simulation, those kinds of things, and we're not bringing all the people that together that have to be a part of delivering a weapon to our warfighter.
I appreciate those comments. And you bring it up time and time again, the legacy platforms and the challenges that they face. And I think that's going to need to be a big portion of the report as we put it together, is really highlighting what's way forward for them and what does that look like, because there aren't that many new programs. And sure, the new programs should be born digital, but there's a lot of money to be made in transforming legacy programs. Tony, do you have any thoughts on this data conversation based on your experiences with working with the government and Space Force?
Yeah, I thought Kevin hit some really important points. So just to amplify those, we definitely see there's great examples of government industry collaboration that I think could be applied, into a digital acquisition context, with the right protections around IP. I would say so. One area which I've been affiliated with for some time, just given my ties in the commercial space, is the Space Force has an effort called the Commercial Integration Cell, where they have 16 companies that that are part of this collaboration with the Space Force. It's awesome in that we all have the ability to have team members on the ops floor in Vandenberg. We can have our clearances held through that process. We get regular threat briefings on things that we need to be worried about, but also we can share information back. And I think having that cadence where we all are coming together as industry in the right environments to be able to share more from an operational perspective how to maintain continuity through different phases of conflict. I think that can be applied into this acquisition area. And so some of what Kevin referenced, which was creating an environment where industry is comfortable bringing their digital models, into an environment where they can be evaluated, against other capabilities. So legacy government systems, other potential new systems, to get some early feedback. As long as we have the right controls in place to make sure people's IP is taken care of and you're addressing the performance, I think that is would be a great step forward in terms of how we can again increase velocity, do it digitally as opposed to building like live prototypes, and ultimately it allows us to impact mission faster.
Part of digital transformation for acquisition is that the government has to be a good partner in this with industry. Absolutely.
No doubt.
So we are about at the top of the hour. And so I just want to ask one final question to each of you. I will start with Mike, then Kevin, and then Tony. And this will be our wrap-up question. And then I'll be turning it over to Arun Serafin, who is the Executive Director of Emerging Technologies Institute. So here's the question. We started off by discussing the definition of digital acquisition. And what is the one piece of advice you'd offer to a program office or a program manager as they want to start their journey to digitally transform their organization for digital acquisition? Mike.
Okay, I would just say you got to be all in. You have to lead from the top, and you have to be willing to make the investment in money and time and training to move forward if you're going to do anything. And all of this has to be sitting side by side with industry.
All in, prioritization and partnership. Awesome. Love it. Kevin.
Yeah, 100% on those. The right team, government team, that means government civilians, military, contractor. and the right, the right RFPs, the right contracts, the right agreements up front, or even legacy contracts. How are we going to mod the contract? How are we going to get on the same page, on the same journey? We've seen a lot of times is throwing things over the fence where the digital ecosystem is not connected. The industry is doing digital, but the government's analog, right? You have to have the whole team bought in, one team approach with the right skilled team makes doing it on both sides.
I love this because the question is about how to start this journey, and it's all about leadership, not about digital things. It's all about leadership. Tony.
I'd say that instead of trying to educate us on the requirement, educate us on the threat in the right environment. And that'll create a sense of urgency for us to invest, to step up.
I love that. And I loved how you mentioned earlier the importance of getting somebody that can translate the technology into the mission or addressing the threat. So we've covered a lot today. We've covered the definition of acquisition, the problem we're trying to solve, the importance of collaborative environments, the challenges with data and IP, but how it can be solved very easily. We've offered that digital practitioners are super important to this conversation. And as it was talked about in this final question, the importance of leadership, prioritization, and investments. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Rune Seraphin for final comments.
Hey, thank you, Stephanie, and to all of our panelists for such a great discussion. I look forward to the rest of the series and seeing how these insights can both shape the discussions in the future and maybe shape some of the activities going on both in industry and in the Pentagon. I noticed from my perspective that you all seem to indicate we're not waiting around for new authorities or new appropriations to kind of get this thing done. Oh, everyone likes appropriations. It seems to be more about putting into use, what already exists. It seems to be more about capturing success stories, empowering leadership, creating muscle memory for how digital acquisition methodologies can actually improve program outcomes. And Stephanie, yes, I do love the idea of a boot camp to help with the building of these capabilities, the set of practitioners within industry and government workforce. If only I had a visiting scholar to help set up something like that going forward. So if everyone has feedback on this event or would like to see what directions you'd like us to take these activities in, please email us at eti@ndia.org. I want to take this opportunity to highlight a few upcoming events. The second iteration of Stephanie's series will be on February 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. Like Stephanie said, we're going to be hearing from program managers about how they've incorporated digital transformation across their program. On February 18th from 1 to 2 p.m., we're going to host a webinar in partnership with the MITRE Corporation to discuss the cutting edge of how AI-enabled market research tools can work for the acquisition workforce. And then our next Tech 101 educational webinar is going to be on February 24th. It's on agentic AI and its strategic adoption within the department. To register for these and other ETI events, please visit our website, www.ndia.org/events. Thanks again to Stephanie and all the panelists for such a great discussion, and thanks everyone for joining us today.